David Adler was in a unique position of being a society architect in Chicago at a time of great wealth and building.
Adler's architectural details in this room are superb. I really feel like I've walked back in time.
Well, you have. This room is based on an early American room that is in the Metropolitan Museum of New York. Doors to nowhere are found quite often in David Adler homes because they were needed for the cemetery, but provided no purpose or use. David Adler made multiple trips to Europe with his clients, and he was very versed in the architecture of Europe, both in its modern day and stage, but also old world architecture, taking pictures, sketches, periodicals that he would gather and collect on these trips and were mailed to his office as well. So he was very much in tune with that.
While a student at Princeton in 1903, David Adler drew his first commission, the front elevation for the renovation of the Charter Club, an eating group where he was a member. It was a classical, Georgian-inspired design. He excelled in courses in architecture his senior year, which pointed him in the direction of a career as an architect. As we see now, it was an exceptional one. After graduating from Princeton, Adler went to study architecture full-time at the Polytechnicum in Munich. Famed for its applied science and industrial arts program. After 3 semesters there, he decided to apply to the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. This highly esteemed fine arts academy, whose origins date back to 1648, was founded by Cardinal Mazarin to educate the most talented students in drawing, painting, sculpture, engraving, and architecture. Its curriculum focused on classical arts and architecture from ancient Greece and Rome. The Sun King, Louis XIV, selected graduates from this school to decorate the royal apartments at Versailles. Few Americans were ever accepted. For one thing, Adler had to be fluent in French and train under a Parisian architect first, which he did, and with resolve, gained admission in 1908. During his time abroad, he often bicycled around France and Italy, absorbing and collecting information, including over 500 postcards, on the exquisite architecture of its past. He also met and befriended young, cutting-edge artisans, including French Jean-Michel Franck and Swiss brothers Diego and Alberto Giacometti, whose contemporary works are highly prized today. David continued to travel to Europe many times throughout the rest of his life. William McCormick-Blair's grandfather founded the first wholesale hardware firm in Chicago in the mid-1800s. And his mother was from the McCormick family that invented a mechanical reaper for agriculture. That firm eventually became International Harvester Corporation and then Navistar. Mrs. Blair's grandmother was a very early Chicagoan, born in Fort Dearborn on the Chicago River. Her grandfather was a founder of the Northern Trust Bank and the Continental Illinois National Bank. Her mother was a distinguished Chicago philanthropist and a leader in the women's suffrage movement. In 1935, William co-founded a firm that came to be called William Blair and Company. It is prominent today and specializes in financial services and investment banking. He recruited David to be a trustee of the Art Institute of Chicago in 1925, where he served until his death in 1949. In honor of his good friend, William subsequently founded the David Adler Music and Arts Center in the architect's former residence in Libertyville, Illinois. Port O'Call is the second residence David Adler designed for them. The first, in a formal English Georgian style, was never built due to World War I. The Blairs had other homes on Astor Street in Chicago and in Bar Harbor, Maine.
The designs that David Adler would produce were not completely unique and original. He was borrowing them, in some cases, from previous generations, styles, and time periods. But finessing those into a house was his great talent. And his clients saw that in him and wanted it. And like so many people, when your neighbor sees something that looks wonderful and beautiful, they want it as well. And so Adler got a lot of his clients from the social circle friends that they had.
We are literally on the shores of Lake Michigan, and you can see downtown Chicago today. This very beautiful early American farm-style home was built to look like it was made slowly over time, but it wasn't.
That's right. David Adler used this element of sectioning off the house. On the east facade that you see here, each section has its own door. There's 3 entry points on a home today. That's more than enough to get in. It's made to look like as the family grew over time, either in number or in prosperity, they added on sections to the home. The west facade of the house also shows those segmented parts. David Adler attended the École des Beaux-Arts, and in his training there, he saw firsthand many of the classic buildings and structures of Europe, taking into account those and bringing those ideas back to his own commissions back in the States.
Tom, will you talk about this Dutch pediment element over the door?
Over the entry to the sun porch, where we now have today an English coat of arms made of wood, is where the ship's maiden that you see in the tennis court originally sat. She looked out over Lake Michigan. That element of Dutch style you see in Adler's archives. He used it in some of his other homes, but he has numerous clippings from his archives of pictures and drawings and uses that.
It adds a marvelous design element to the facade.
Yes, it certainly is a nice central part to the dormers on either side. David Adler was worldly. He was also very caring and giving of his time to various charities and philanthropic endeavors, primarily the Art Institute of Chicago. David Adler was in a unique position of being a society architect in Chicago at a time of great wealth and building. His clients were very loyal to him, and he was very loyal to them, having many repeat clients in the same family, even other relatives being clients.
This front door is extremely striking.
It's one that David Adler designed after seeing the Blairs' friends, James Watson Webb and Electra Havemeyer Webb, at their home in Long Island. It's a Dutch door with the chevron design to it. It's something that the Webbs had, and Mr. Adler thought the Blairs should have as well.
So this style originates from the 18th century?
That's right. It's something Adler would have seen and been familiar with on his travels throughout Europe and early American history as well.
And your eye is drawn to it because of the contrast of the black and white, but yet it's not overwhelming to the entire facade.
It's very indicative of the house. It's a simple structure with some very nice detailing. When you walk through a David Adler home, many of his rooms are about symmetry. And you see that in the space that you're in. Pair of shelving units, pairs of doors, pairs of windows. Some of those are real, some of those are there just for effect. Doors to nowhere are found quite often in David Adler homes because they were needed for the symmetry, but provided no purpose or use.
Adler's architectural details in this room are superb. I really feel like I've walked back in time.
Well, you have. This room is based on an early American room that is in the Metropolitan Museum of New York, the Hewlett Room. The American wing opened up in the early 1920s, a few years before this house was built. It brought architects and designers to a public museum and seeing homes of an earlier period. David Adler found great inspiration in the things that were at the Met. In his archives, he has a number of postcards, drawings, and photographs from the Met. The manganese delft tiles and the niche are what were in the Hewlett Room. Adler, in his typical style of adding balance to a room, added the second one. And behind me, the wall murals here are a painting on fabric, and we know that these were purchased from the New York dealer Eleanor Merrill. The Art Institute of Chicago has photographs of these murals in their archives. Taking a plain piece of land in 1926 and making it into this estate for the Blair family. There are numerous caretakers who would travel with them, both here and downtown, and when they would go to Bar Harbor in Maine every summer. It really gives you a sense of the vision that David Adler had in laying out this estate for the Blairs.
This gallery is incredible. I love how David Adler recessed these prints.
These are an original detail to the home here. They house the Currier and Ive print collection that the Blair family had. It was depicting scenes and battles of American wars, and since the Blairs collected Americana and decorated with that, these prints fit nicely. David Adler was a master of space and size and dimension and proportion, which in today's architecture you can get it, but the masters of today do that. David Adler was a master in his time period and did that.
David Adler was an historicist, and it's very clear that he created authentic ambiance here in this early American-styled home.
The William McCormick-Blair house here is one of the most intact and original David Adler houses. Even down in this room, which we call the drawing room, the chintz curtain panels are original to the house in 1927.
I noticed the door frames, just like it was in early America, the door frames are even lower in height.
Yes, it isn't quite the Frank Lloyd Wright bringing you from a small doorway into a larger grand room, but David Adler knew the intimacy of the rooms that he was leading people into. As we come into the library here, it's a great example and room to show you the symmetry and balance that David Adler created. The two doors here that have their leaded fan lights above, one is our entry point. The other one is what I call a door to nowhere. It's there just for the symmetry and balance of the room.
A false door, a faux door.
That's right. 3 of the 4 doors in this room are functional and lead in or out of the room, but that 4th one needed to be there for balance.
So in this room, David Adler used architectural salvage from an early American home.
Most of this room is comprised of paneling, pine paneling from a home in Virginia that David Adler purchased the paneling from and installed here. Adler added new baseboard around the room to make it work with the ceiling heights that the Blair needed in this room. Behind you is a painting on the wall that has always been there in part of this room and its history. It says Newbol, Vinson, and has the date of 1791, we're still researching and trying to figure out who that original family was and the significance of the 1791 date.
This room is extremely charming.
It has great character. David Adler, as wonderful of an architect as he was not a huge self-promoter, similar to Frank Lloyd Wright and some other architects who were contemporaries of his and came after. In the entryway to the tennis house is also a wallpaper that was taken from a house in Europe and reinstalled here. This is a ship's maiden who would have been on an old cutter ship. We don't know which ship it's from. It originally sat on the east side of the main house above the Blairs sun porch. David Adler put this up there, and it's in his early drawings for the house. Over the years, and sitting outside of harsh Chicago winters, we decided to take it, and she's the maiden of the court here.
So this court's original surface was clay. And this ivy was original from the 1920s also. It's magnificent.
It really does make this court. The clay that was here from 1928 when the building was finished until the mid-1970s when the Blairs changed it to this rubber surface, which was a cost-cutting effort and is very much more low maintenance to take care of. The ivy has been growing since the building was built as well.
And I noticed there's different topiary shapes.
Yes, those also have been here since the beginning of the building's construction. The eagles are in a reference to the Americana that the Blairs collected, and that their friends, the Webbs, were also deeply interested in Americana. The roosters are what shape the east and west ends of the building.
How did they water the ivy?
Just a simple garden hose. There's a drain all the way around the perimeter of the building, and all you need to do is hose it down. In the summer, it can be like a greenhouse in here and extremely hot. That's why this was mainly used and only used as a winter tennis court.
This is extremely unusual. This court is almost 100 years old.
That's right. This is one of two in the Chicago area. The other one David Adler did, the Kersey Coates Reed House. That one he did on his own. This one he did in partnership with the architect from New York, James W. O'Connor. O'Connor did a number of playhouses in Long Island, and then he did this one in conjunction with David Adler. The thing that I admire about David Adler's work is the classical beauty of the buildings that he created. They stand the test of time. They're not dated.
So David Adler planned or laid out this area for the staff in this cutting garden.
That's right. The cutting garden, potting shed, greenhouse, dependencies for the gardener's cottage, and chauffeur for the Blair staff were all in this area. Just Off of this area is also what David Adler called the summer house on his plans, but it wasn't a grand building. It was a small garden folly pavilion that he built that the Blair children could go to and have an afternoon of play there.
This cutting garden was primarily for florals for the main house.
They had easy access to make arrangements from the flowers that were here on site. Also, the Blairs could bundle up and send some to their Astor Street home in downtown Chicago.
It's truly lovely. I'm sorry we had a late spring here because I can imagine how colorful it would be.
It's beautiful.